There are moments in life that don't announce themselves. They don't arrive with warning signs or flashing lights. They don't give you time to prepare. They just happen, quietly, suddenly, in the most ordinary places on the most ordinary days. And if you're not paying attention, you miss them entirely. But if you are paying attention, if, by some combination of fate and circumstance, your eyes happen to be open at exactly the right moment, they change you in ways you will spend years trying to put into words. This is one of those moments. And it happened in a grocery store in the middle of a Tuesday morning in November, in a city that had no idea what it was about to witness. He had $347 million. A private jet registered in his name, fueled and ready at a regional airport 40 minutes outside of Chicago. A penthouse on the 64th floor of a building that bore his company's initials in brushed steel above the lobby entrance. He had a personal assistant who managed his calendar 3 months in advance. He had a chef. He had a driver. He had a team of accountants, 3 attorneys on retainer, and a financial advisor who monitored his portfolio at all hours of the day. He had, by every measurable standard this country uses to decide what a life is worth, everything. And on a Tuesday morning in November, standing under the bright white lights of a high-end grocery store with marble floors and $40 olive oil on the shelves, his card wouldn't buy a $12 cup of soup. What happened next would be reported across 12 countries. It would go from a local Chicago news item to a story discussed on national morning programs, shared millions of times across social media, and debated on talk radio from Dallas to Detroit. It would quietly reunite a family that had been fractured for 8 years. It would alter the financial and emotional trajectory of a little girl and her mother in ways that are still unfolding to this day. But here is what nobody mentions when they tell this story. The moment that changed everything, the moment that cracked this man open after 20 years of accumulated armor, was not when his card was declined. It was what happened in the 30 seconds that followed. It was a 9-year-old girl named Maya. And what she did with $15 was something that $347 million could never have bought. Before we go any further, and before we get to what Maya actually did in that checkout line, you need to understand something about the way this story works. Because this is not a simple story. It is not a feel-good video designed to make you smile for 90 seconds before you scroll on with your life. This is a story about what happens when 2 human beings, separated by every form of distance that money can create, end up standing 3 feet apart, and one of them turns out to be carrying something the other one desperately needs. Not groceries, not cash, something far more difficult to come by. And before we get to the moment itself, you need to know who these 2 people are. You need to know where they came from. Because if you don't know the distance between their lives, you cannot understand the size of what crossed it. Who is this man, really, behind the net worth, the jet, the penthouse, the name on the building? Because the public version of him is easy to find. The private version is something else entirely, and it is the private version that matters here. Who is this little girl? Where did she come from? Who taught her, at 9 years old, with $15 in her jacket pocket, that the correct response to a stranger's embarrassment is not to look away, not to whisper to the person beside you, not to check your phone, but to step forward? And perhaps the most extraordinary question of all, why did this man, a man who had given millions to charity, a man whose name was on a university building, later describe this as the single most important day of his adult life? What happened in that store, and in the days and weeks that followed, that could make a billionaire say that out loud and mean it completely? And before we go any deeper into this story, we want to hear from you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming stories. We tell stories like this one every week, and we think you'll want to be there for what's coming. Now, let's go back to the beginning. Not to that grocery store. Further back than that. Back to Dayton, Ohio, in 1972, and a boy named Richard. Richard Calloway was born on a Wednesday in March of 1972 in a 2-bedroom house on the east side of Dayton, Ohio, to a man named Gerald who worked the overnight shift at a Frigidaire assembly plant, and a woman named Ruth who waitressed 6 days a week at a diner called Hubert's on 5th Street. The house had 1 bathroom, a furnace that rattled through the winters, and a kitchen table where Ruth would sit on Sunday mornings with a cup of coffee and the coupons she had cut from the weekly circular. Richard was the middle of 3 children. He wore his older brother's hand-me-down sneakers until the soles separated. He knew, From the time he was old enough to understand what money was, that there was never quite enough of it, and that his parents worked themselves to exhaustion every single day to ensure there was at least enough. Not plenty, enough. And in that household, enough was its own kind of grace. Richard was sharp from the beginning. His teachers knew it. His mother knew it. He scored in the 98th percentile on every standardized test the Dayton City School District put in front of him. And when he was 17, a guidance counselor named Mr. Albert Benson sat him down in a small office that smelled like coffee and old paper and told him, very clearly, without any softening, that Richard had the kind of mind that did not belong in a factory. That whatever Richard decided to do with his life, he owed it to himself to aim as far as that mind could reach. Richard went home that evening and told his mother what Mr. Benson said. Ruth put down the dish she was washing, dried her hands on a towel, looked at her son for a long moment, and said, "I know." She had always known. She had been waiting for someone else to tell him. He earned a partial scholarship to Ohio State. He worked 2 jobs to cover the rest: a campus dining hall on weekday mornings, a hardware store on weekends. He ate soup from a can at his desk because he could not afford the time it took to cook a real meal. He graduated in 3.5 years with a degree in business logistics and $1,700 in savings, which he used to rent a one-room office in a strip mall on the outskirts of Columbus and start a company that, in its first year, operated out of that single room with 1 desk, 1 phone, 1 secondhand computer, and 1 client. The company was called Calloway Freight Solutions. He was 24 years old, and he was, by any reasonable assessment, no one. He had no investors, no safety net, no family money to fall back on. He had the education he had scraped together and the work ethic Ruth had pressed into him at that Dayton kitchen table, and he had an almost frightening capacity to outwork every person in whatever room he entered. That, it turned out, was enough to start. Calloway Freight Solutions grew. Not overnight. Nothing real ever does, but steadily, relentlessly, in the way that businesses grow when the person running them refuses to stop. Within 5 years, Richard had 15 employees and contracts with 3 mid-sized manufacturing companies in the Midwest. Within 10 years, he had 200 employees and a national presence. Within 15 years, Calloway Freight Solutions was a logistics company with operations in 22 states, contracts with some of the largest retailers in the country, and an annual revenue that had crossed the $500 million mark. Richard Calloway, the son of a factory worker and a waitress from Dayton, Ohio, was, by the time he turned 40, worth more money than everyone he had ever grown up with combined. And somewhere in those 15 years of building, somewhere in the grinding ascent from nothing to everything, he had, quietly, and without fully noticing it, lost something. Not his competence, not his drive, something quieter and harder to name. Something that had lived in him as a boy at that Dayton kitchen table and had slowly, without a single dramatic moment of departure, gone dark. His wife, Carol, a woman he had married at 29, a woman who had stood beside him through the hardest years of building the company, left him 2 years before the Tuesday we are talking about. The divorce was quiet and civil. There were no lawyers screaming at each other across conference tables. They divided what they had. They agreed on arrangements for their 2 adult children, and they went their separate ways with the particular kind of sadness that belongs to marriages that did not end in betrayal or cruelty, but simply in the slow accumulation of distance. Richard moved into the penthouse on the 64th floor. He told his friends, the ones he still spoke to, which was fewer than he would have admitted, that he was fine. He told his assistant he was fine. He told himself he was fine with the practiced ease of a man who has spent 20 years being too busy to examine anything that might be inconvenient. He was not fine, but he did not know that yet. He would not know it until a Tuesday morning in November, when a machine beeped 3 times and a 9-year-old girl did something that left him unable to move for 45 minutes. Now, 4 blocks from that grocery store, in a 3-room apartment on the 2nd floor of a building on West Jackson Avenue, a woman named Dorothy Simmons was making breakfast at 6:30 in the morning. Dorothy was 68 years old. She had worked for 31 years as a school cafeteria manager before her knees gave out, and the doctors told her she needed to slow down, which she did, in the way that women of her generation slow down, which is to say she did not stop. She simply changed the pace of what she refused to stop doing. She was raising her granddaughter. Her daughter, a woman named Angela, had been admitted to Rush University Medical Center 3 months earlier with a condition that the doctors described as treatable and that the insurance company described as not covered. Angela had worked as a home health aide for 11 years. She paid her premiums. She paid them on time, every month, with money she had carefully set aside after covering rent and groceries and Maya's school supplies. And when the claim came in, the insurance company found a clause, and they used it, and Angela Simmons was left with a hospital bill that might as well have been written in a language she had never been taught to read. Maya was 9 years old. She was in the 4th grade at Marcus Garvey Elementary School, 4 blocks from the apartment, where her teacher, a woman named Ms. Patricia Reeves, who had taught 4th grade for 18 years and who did not give compliments carelessly, described her in a parent-teacher conference that Dorothy attended alone as, and these are Ms. Reeves' exact words, the most quietly perceptive child I have taught in almost 2 decades. Not the smartest, though she was sharp. Not the most talented, though she had a gift for language that showed up in her writing assignments in ways that made Ms. Reeves stop and read them twice. Perceptive. Maya noticed things. She noticed when other children were struggling with an assignment and moved to sit beside them without being asked. She noticed when the custodian was having a hard day and said good morning to him by name on her way in. She noticed, every single Tuesday afternoon, exactly how far Dorothy's $15 could stretch inside that grocery store, and she planned accordingly, walking the aisles with a quiet, focused purpose that made the other shoppers step aside without knowing why. That Tuesday morning, Maya woke up before her alarm. She helped Dorothy make oatmeal. She checked that the $15, 3 fives, pressed flat, was secure in the inside pocket of her jacket, the one with the zipper that didn't stick. She packed her backpack for school. She ate breakfast at the kitchen table, where Dorothy's Bible sat open to a passage in Proverbs that Dorothy read every morning before the day got loud. And as Maya stood to leave, Dorothy reached out and tucked a loose strand of hair behind Maya's ear and said, "You be good today." Maya said, "I'm always good, Grandma." And Dorothy smiled in the way grandmothers smile when a grandchild says something true that they already know. Maya walked out the door, down the stairs, and into the November morning. She had no idea, none, that in approximately 6 hours, she was going to do something that would follow her for the rest of her life. She was just going to school. She was just a 4th grader on a Tuesday morning, with $15 in her jacket pocket and her grandmother's oatmeal, keeping her warm from the inside. And Richard Calloway, $347 million to his name, was standing in his kitchen on the 64th floor, irritated. His driver had called in sick. His assistant had offered to arrange a car service, but Richard had waved it off with the impatient gesture of a man who decides, in a rare and poorly timed fit of self-sufficiency, that he will handle something himself. He had run out of soup. He remembered, vaguely, that there was a grocery store. He had passed it several times, in the back of the car, watching it slide by the window like a detail in the background of his actual life. He would stop there. He would be back in 20 minutes. It would be fine. He took the elevator down. He walked the 4 blocks in the November cold with his hands in the pockets of his coat. He did not make eye contact with anyone. He was, at this moment, a man in his own head, moving through a world he had not fully inhabited in a very long time. He pushed open the door to the store. The warm air and the fluorescent lights and the smell of fresh bread from the bakery section hit him, and for just a second, just a fraction of a second, something moved across his face that he would not have been able to name. A flicker of something. Carol looked at the screen. She looked at Richard. Richard found his voice. He said she didn't have to do that. Maya said, "I know." He told her he had money. Plenty of money. More than she could imagine. This was just a technical problem. A glitch. He would have it sorted out in 5 minutes. Maya said, "Okay." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out one of his business cards. The heavy cream-colored ones with his name embossed in navy blue. The ones his designer had spent 2 weeks selecting the paper weight for, and he held it out to her and told her who he was. She looked at the card. She looked at him. She took the card. She looked at it again for exactly the amount of time it takes a 9-year-old to determine whether a piece of information is relevant to her present situation. And she handed it back. "It's okay, mister," she said. "It happens." She turned back to the register. Carol, who had been watching all of this with the expression of someone witnessing something they planned to describe to their family at dinner that evening, finished scanning and gave Maya her total. Maya counted her change. She was 12 cents over. She asked Carol to put it in the little take-a-penny tray by the register. Then she picked up her 2 bags, said, "Have a good day," to Carol, and walked toward the door. Richard called after her. She turned. He told her he was going to pay her back. 10 times over, 100 times over. He meant it. This was not charity. This was a debt, and he intended to honor it. Maya looked at him with those steady, dark eyes and said something that Carol Watson would repeat in an interview 11 months later, and that a journalist would quote in a story that ran in the Chicago Tribune, and that a morning television host would read aloud on a program watched by 4 million people. She said, "You don't owe me anything. Just be kind to somebody today." Then she pushed open the glass door and walked out into the November morning, her 2 grocery bags hanging from her hands, heading home to Dorothy. Richard Calloway stood at the exit of that store and watched her until she turned the corner and was gone. And then he walked to his car, and he sat down in the driver's seat. And he did not move for 45 minutes. He did not call his driver. He did not call his assistant to sort out the card situation. He did not check his email, which by that point had 37 unread messages, several of them flagged urgent by people who believed that their urgency was the most important urgency in the world. He sat in his car in the parking lot of a grocery store on West Jackson Avenue, and he felt something cracking open in his chest, not painfully, not dramatically, but with the slow, irreversible pressure of a fault line shifting. He felt like a man who had been holding his breath for so long that he had stopped noticing he wasn't breathing, and something had just forced air back into his lungs. He felt like the boy in Dayton. He felt like the version of himself that had existed before the company and the penthouse and the jet and the building with his initials and the divorce he handled so efficiently and the phone calls to his children that were never quite long enough. He felt, for the first time in a period he could not precisely measure, but that he suspected was measured in years, something genuine. And it was not a comfortable feeling, but it was real. And real, he was beginning to remember, was the point. He thought about what she had said. Just be kind to somebody today. Not tomorrow. Not when it was convenient. Not when it came with a press release and a tax deduction and a plaque at a gala dinner. Today. He sat with that for a long time. And then he picked up his phone. And he did not call his assistant. He did not call his attorney. He did not call his financial advisor. He scrolled through his contacts, a list that contained hundreds of names, most of them professional, most of them representing some form of transaction, until he found a name he had not called in 8 years. His sister, a woman named Diane, who still lived in Dayton, who still worked as a nurse, who had sent him a card when the divorce was finalized with a handwritten note that said simply, "I'm here if you need me," and who had received no response. He stared at her name for a moment. Then he pressed call. And when she picked up, surprised, cautious, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of a person who has been hurt by a long silence. Richard Calloway said the first honest thing he had said to another person in longer than he could account for. He said, "Diane, I think I forgot who I was supposed to be." Diane did not say anything for a moment. The line was quiet in the way that lines go quiet when something unexpected and true has just been said into them. Then she said, "I know, Richie," not with anger, not with bitterness, though she would have had the right to both. With the resigned, loving patience of a sister who had watched her brother disappear into his own success, and who had simply been waiting, without any guarantee that the wait would ever end, for him to find his way back to the surface. They talked for 40 minutes in that parking lot. Not about the company, not about money, not about the divorce or the estrangement or the years of silence. They talked about their mother, Ruth, who had died for years earlier, and at whose funeral Richard had stood dry-eyed and left early because he had a board meeting in the morning that he had told himself he could not reschedule. He wept now, in the parking lot, in a way he had not allowed himself to weep at the funeral. Diane wept too. He went back to the store the following Tuesday. He asked Carol if she knew the girl. Carol said she knew her by sight. She came in every Tuesday, always around the same time, always with the same careful, measured approach to her grocery list. She did not know her name or where she lived. Richard thanked her and left. He went back the Tuesday after that, and the Tuesday after that. He was not certain, entirely, what he intended to do when he found her. He knew he needed to say something more than what he had managed in that parking lot doorway. He knew he needed to look her in the eye again. This child who had handed him back something he had not known was missing, and say something that approximated the truth of what her $15 had done to him. Not the money, not the act, the steadiness in her eyes, the complete absence of self-consciousness. The way she had said, just be kind to somebody today, the way a person states a fact rather than delivers a sermon. He needed to say, you changed something in me that I did not know needed changing. And I am grateful. And I am sorry it took a 9-year-old to do what 20 years of success and philanthropy and good intentions failed to accomplish. On the third Tuesday, he was sitting in his car near the entrance. He had come to feel, he would later admit, slightly foolish about the whole enterprise, a grown man of 51 sitting in a grocery store parking lot in a coat that cost more than some people's monthly rent, waiting for a fourth grader, when he saw her. Walking along the sidewalk, backpack on, purpose in every step. He got out of the car. He approached carefully. He was aware, acutely, of what a grown man approaching a child on a sidewalk in a city looks like, and he kept his distance and called her name from several feet back and waited for her to turn and recognize him before he took another step. She turned. She looked at him. She did not look afraid. She looked the way she had looked in the store, steady, present, mildly curious. She tilted her head slightly and said, "You came back." He said, "I wanted to give you something." He held out an envelope. Inside was a cashier's check for $15, the exact amount, and a letter he had written by hand, which had taken him 4 drafts and parts of 2 evenings to complete on his personal stationery. He had not written a letter by hand since college. His handwriting was unsteady in places. Maya took the envelope. She opened it carefully. She read the letter, and he watched her read it. This child who read the way she did everything, with absolute attention, moving her lips slightly over certain words, pausing twice. When she finished, she folded it and put it in her jacket pocket. Then she looked at the check. Then she looked at him. Then she held the check out. "I can't take this," she said. He told her it wasn't charity. It was repayment. She had covered his groceries, and he was settling the debt. It was the only honorable thing to do. Maya considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Then she said, "Grandma says you don't take back a gift. You gave it when you gave it. It's gone now." She tucked the check back into the envelope and held it out to him. He took it. He stood there holding an envelope containing a cashier's check that his bank had charged him $8 to issue, and he did not know what to do with the feeling that was in his chest, which was something between absurdity and the most enormous tenderness he had experienced since his children were small. Then Maya tilted her head again and said, "Do you need help with your groceries today?" He laughed. It came out of him the way laughter comes when it has been held back for a long time. Surprised, involuntary, genuine. He shook his head. He said he was okay. Maya nodded, as if this answer were entirely satisfactory, and said, "I'm going to go in now. You should come in sometime." Then she walked past him through the door. He went in. He followed her through the store at a respectful distance. And at the end of their separate grocery runs, they ended up at the same checkout, Carol's Lane, where Carol raised her eyebrows at Richard in the way of a woman who has now seen this man in her store 3 weeks in a row and has formed a fairly complete theory about why. As they walked out together, Richard asked if he could walk with her. Maya said yes. And as they walked the 4 blocks to West Jackson Avenue, she told him about Dorothy, about her grandmother who had managed a school cafeteria for 31 years and who read her Bible every morning before the day got loud, about her mother, Angela, who was in the hospital. She told him about this without self-pity, without any particular bid for his sympathy, in the matter-of-fact way of a child who has processed a difficult reality so thoroughly that it has become simply part of the landscape, the way she told him about school or the store or what Dorothy was making for dinner. She stated the facts. Her mother was sick. The hospital bills were large. They were managing. Dorothy had told her that when things are hard, you don't sit down. You keep your feet moving, and you stay grateful, and you ask God and the world for help when you need it, and you give help when you can, and that is all any person can do. Maya relayed this as though it were a basic instruction in the operation of a life. Richard listened and did not say anything, because there was nothing to say. Dorothy answered the door in a house dress and slippers, with the composed, measuring expression of a woman who has lived long enough that very little catches her entirely off guard. She looked at Richard. She looked at Maya. She looked at Richard again. And then she said something that stopped him so completely that he later told Diane, on one of their now regular phone calls, that he had felt the ground actually shift beneath him. Dorothy looked at Richard Calloway, CEO of Calloway Freight Solutions, $347 million, 64 floors, the jet, the building, the whole architecture of a life built to announce its own significance, and said, "I know who you are." He assumed she recognized his name from the news. He began to explain. She shook her head. "Your mother used to come to our church," she said. "Ruth Calloway, East Dayton Community Church of God. She used to bring a green bean casserole to every potluck." She paused. "She was one of the kindest women I have ever known." Richard Calloway did not speak for a very long time. Dorothy went to a shelf in the hallway, the kind of shelf that exists in the homes of people who have kept things carefully, where framed photographs stand in clusters and small objects hold the weight of entire decades. She came back with a photograph. A Kodak print, the glossy kind with the white border, yellowed slightly with age. A church picnic. Summer, 1987. Long tables covered in paper cloths. Children running in the grass in the background, blurred with motion. Dorothy's late husband, a man named James, in the foreground, his head back in laughter. And there, in the back of the photograph, slightly out of focus but unmistakably present, a boy, maybe 9 years old. Round face. A striped t-shirt too big for his shoulders. His mouth open mid-sentence, saying something to someone just out of frame. Richard looked at the photograph for a long time. He looked at it the way you look at something when the seeing of it is physically uncomfortable and you cannot stop looking anyway. "That's you," Dorothy said. "In the back there." He was 9 years old in that photograph. He was the same age, in that photograph, as the girl who had just walked him 4 blocks down West Jackson Avenue to this doorway. The same age as Maya. His mother had stood in this woman's church. His mother had brought a green bean casserole to Dorothy's table. And 40 years later, Dorothy's granddaughter, a 9-year-old girl with $15 and a zipper pocket and the moral clarity of someone who had been raised well, had stepped forward in a checkout line and given back to him, without knowing any of this, without any knowledge of the thread that ran between their families across 4 decades, something his mother would have recognized immediately. Something Ruth Calloway had practiced every day at a diner on 5th Street in Dayton for 30 years. Simple, unconditional, unself-conscious human kindness. He stood in that doorway for a long time. Dorothy looked at him with the patience of someone who understands that certain realizations require space. Maya had gone to the kitchen to put away the groceries. The sounds of the apartment moved around them, a pot beginning to heat on the stove, the television low in the next room, the ordinary, irreplaceable sounds of a home where someone is always tending to something. Richard asked Dorothy about Angela. She told him. The condition, the bills, the insurance company's clause, the calculations she and Angela had been running for 3 months. She told him without asking for anything. She was simply answering his question, the way she answered everything, directly, with dignity, with no performance of hardship and no disguising of it either. Richard listened. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he asked if he could help. Dorothy looked at him. She looked at him the way she had looked at him when she opened the door, measuring, careful, seeing things in a person's face that most people miss or don't bother to look for. Then she said, "Only if you come back next Tuesday. Maya needs somebody to help her carry the bags." He came back. Every Tuesday for the next 4 months, Richard Calloway drove to West Jackson Avenue, parked his car, not the penthouse garage car, not the company car, but the old Jeep he had kept in storage for 11 years for no reason he had ever examined, and walked to the grocery store with Maya. He carried the bags. He learned the Tuesday route, the produce section first, then beans and grains, then the bread aisle where Maya knew exactly which loaf gave the most slices for the price, then the register, Carol's Lane, where Carol eventually stopped being surprised and started simply nodding at him with the expression of someone whose theory about a person has been thoroughly confirmed. He paid for Angela's medical treatment through a foundation, anonymously, or as anonymously as a man worth $347 million can arrange these things, which is to say it eventually became known, because things like that always do. Angela came home from Rush University Medical Center on a Thursday in February, 6 weeks after Richard first knocked on Dorothy's door. Maya made a card. Dorothy cooked a meal. Richard was not there for any of it, because it was not his moment and he understood that. But Dorothy called him afterward and told him, and he sat in his penthouse on the 64th floor and looked out at the February lake and felt something settle in his chest that had not been settled in a very long time. He reconciled with Diane. It was not a dramatic reconciliation. There was no single scene of catharsis, no ceremony of forgiveness. It was a series of phone calls and then a visit, him driving back to Dayton for the first time in 9 years on a Saturday morning in January, parking in front of Diane's house, ringing the bell, standing on the porch of a house on the east side of Dayton in the January cold until his sister opened the door and said, simply, "You look terrible, Richie. Come inside." He ate at her kitchen table. The kitchen smelled like coffee and something baking in the oven. He recognized the smell. It was the smell of every kitchen in every house he had known as a boy in Dayton. The smell that no amount of money or elevation or success had ever been able to replicate in a 64th-floor penthouse with a chef on speed dial. He stayed for 7 hours. He drove home in the dark. He called her again the next morning. The story leaked in March. Carol mentioned it to a neighbor, which is how all true stories eventually get out. Not through press releases or announcements, but through the ordinary, unstoppable human impulse to tell someone something true and moving. A local Chicago journalist named Patricia Howard picked it up, reported it carefully, and published a piece that had been shared on social media over 600,000 times within the first week. National outlets followed. Television programs called. Richard declined most of them. He gave one interview, a single 40-minute conversation with Patricia Howard for a follow-up piece, in which he said almost everything he had been carrying since November. He was asked what the lesson was. He thought about it. He thought about it long enough that Patricia later said she had almost prompted him, that the silence had become uncomfortable, that she was reaching for a way to rephrase the question when he finally spoke. And what he said was this: "I had $347 million, and I was broke. Not in my account. In here." He placed his hand on his chest. "A kid with $15 in her pocket was richer than I had been in 20 years. I have been trying to catch up ever since." Patricia Howard wrote that she did not follow up with another question. She simply let him sit with what he had said, and when she looked up from her notepad, she saw that he was looking out the window with the expression of a man who has finally, after a very long time, told the truth. Maya is still Maya. She is in 5th grade now. She still walks to the grocery store on Tuesdays, though sometimes she has company. She still counts the change carefully. She still holds doors. Angela is working again. She went back to home health aide work in March. Her case file's full of people who, by every indication, have no idea that the woman caring for them has been through what she has been through, and who would probably find in that fact, if they knew it, some form of the same thing Richard Calloway found in a checkout line on a Tuesday in November. Dorothy still reads her Bible before the day gets loud. She still makes green bean casserole for church potlucks. She is, in every way that matters, the person she has always been. Maya won a school essay contest in the spring. The topic was a person you admire. Her teacher, Ms. Patricia Reeves, the one who described her as the most quietly perceptive child she had taught in 18 years, read the essay before the class and had to stop once, briefly, to compose herself. Maya had not written about her mother, though she could have. She had not written about Richard Calloway, though the world expected her to. She had written about Dorothy. She had written about her grandmother's morning Bible and her Tuesday grocery lists and the way Dorothy had always told her that you never leave a person in the middle of their embarrassment if you have any way of helping them through it. She had written, "My grandma taught me that you always have something to give. Even when you think you don't, you do. And the second you give it, you understand that you had it all along." There is a woman in Chicago named Carol Watson who has worked the same register for going on 20 years. She told a reporter, when all of this became a story worth telling, that she has seen everything her checkout line has to offer. Proposals, breakdowns, first jobs, last dollars. The whole panorama of a human life, conducted one transaction at a time. She was asked what she remembered most about that Tuesday in November, about the moment Maya put down her $15 and said, "Put his with mine." Carol thought about it. Then she said, "She didn't look proud of herself. That's what I remember. Most people, when they do something kind in public, they look around to see if people noticed. Maya didn't look around. She looked at the register. She was just waiting for me to finish scanning. Like it was just the next thing. Like it was obvious." Carol paused. "I've been doing this job for a long time," she said, "and I have never seen anything more obvious in my life. I think about it almost every day. In a country that measures people by what they have accumulated, by the floor they live on and the numbers in their accounts and the weight of their business cards. A 9-year-old girl on West Jackson Avenue in Chicago reminded a billionaire of the only arithmetic that actually holds up over time. You always have something to give. The second you give it, you understand that you had it all along. Richard Calloway carries that around now in the way you carry something you almost lost and cannot imagine having lived without. He carries it on Tuesdays, in the bread aisle of a grocery store on West Jackson Avenue, holding 2 bags while a 5th grader in a backpack tells him which loaf gives the most slices for the price. He has not missed a Tuesday since November. He does not intend to. That is the story. And if it moved you, even a fraction, then we want to ask you something before you go. Have you ever had a stranger do something small for you that you have never been able to forget? Have you ever been in a moment like that checkout line? Either the person whose card was declined or the person who watched it happen and felt the pull between looking away and stepping forward? Leave it in the comments. We read every single one. These are the stories that remind us who we actually are underneath everything that gets piled on top of us over the years. And if you want more stories like this one, stories about the moments when ordinary people do extraordinary things in ordinary places, hit subscribe. Because next week, we are telling you about a woman in rural Tennessee who spent 30 years quietly doing something for the children in her community that the entire town only discovered after she was gone. Nobody knew, not even her own family. And when it came out, it changed the way that entire community understood what it means to be a neighbor. It is one of the most quietly powerful stories we have come across in years. We think you need to hear it. We will see you then.